Thank you for having us. I was actually worried about my circadian rhythm, so that was all the worry. It was a personal issue. Yeah. um, I am just blown away. I think the professionalism of these presentations and CHPC. Thank you so much for bringing in such talented people and such a talented audience as well. I know a lot of faces in the audience who've been thinking about this for a long time. I am really excited by the things that we just saw. I'm excited about the opportunity to integrate them into a pilot, which is really for the first time in a very long time in the city of New York. We're actually going to be experimenting with some of these principles and some of these code changes. It's in a specific neighborhood. It is an older housing stock neighborhood. Thank you to Councilman Lander for sponsoring the bill that is going to dictate these changes. There's a lot of agencies involved. There's a lot of concern. There's a lot of history to cellar occupancy, basement occupancy. Actually, CHPC, and I think was one of the first entities on the record to get people out of cellars. So I think it's an amazing upswing and kind of cycle that we're having this conversation today to really, and evidence as well of our housing crunch, that we're looking to find new housing models. I'll just say for the city, it's not unique just to the basement pilot. We're looking at kind of piloting mixed income housing that has allows for more people to occupy spaces, shared housing, new models of SRO housing. And so we're looking for these ways to introduce new housing supply to the city where there are nooks and crannies and opportunities for it. So with that context, thank you to everybody. I will just kind of lead with saying, because we're embarking on this pilot, because of your expertise, what do you think is just absolutely vital that we be looking at? We have this opportunity to, we have a list of metrics that we're working with CHPC on to measure. We have 3 years to do work and measure the impact of that work. What do you think is just absolutely vital that is just we don't miss, that we're probably not looking at now because personally I've never, we've never talked about like circadian rhythm and lumens and these types of phrases. So what do you think is just like low-hanging fruit in the lighting world that you can't miss to start with?
Oh, so I'm first. Okay. Well, so I think really I'm going to say sleep is a really big important part of it. If we're doing something effectively, that's something that we can try to measure or at least try to log. But I think that there's also a really important thing as it relates to comfort, and we got to make sure that these spaces, if we try to bring light in one little electric light, make sure that it's not uncomfortable to look at, because then you're basically wasting everything that you thought you were doing. So sleep is really important and a foundation of what we're trying to achieve from a circadian standpoint, but I also think that it can't come you can't compromise comfort in order to achieve that.
I think I was very, very impressed to see what the London Code guidelines are and the fact that they're performance-based relative to quantity of light, and that allows it to take into the context what the external environment is, what the proportions of the building are, and come up with a specific solution that's going to provide the same quality to every person that's in that space. And I think that's a incredible achievement, and will be something that we would be lucky to have, as opposed to, I feel like our code right now is so restrictive. You can be doing so much better but still be in violation of it. So a qualitative metric specific to access to daylight.
Yeah, I think I agree. I like the metric that London uses, which is the average daylight factor. I think a code needs to be very simple. It needs to be easy to understand. It needs to be measurable, repeatable. It needs to be easily measurable. Sometimes something like an advanced daylighting factor takes a rather advanced model to be able to do. and it can be manipulated based upon how much light you tell the model it has outside and those kind of things, which regulators may not understand. They'll just look at the model and say, okay, yeah, you've met it, that's fine. So I think when you think about codes, you have to think about, well, how much light do I want in this, and not just average, but you can get an average by having, as Jen showed, 5,000 foot candles at the window and 0 at the back wall, and still your average illuminance looks great. So I think you have to look at those things and look at different measures. I think for circadian, I think a measure like CS is a very good measure. You know the spectrum of daylight. You can then incorporate the spectrum of electric light. But I think distribution, reflectances, those kind of things do need to come into it. It's not just how much, but then where is the light going in the space.
I'll echo what Dan said about the importance of measurability of any standards that you produce. I'm in charge of the case studies program at Lighting Research Center, and I'm always learning every year about what real people have to say about electric lighting and daylighting. So putting this into practice, this demonstration project that you're doing in East New York, I think you'll learn fantastic results, create photos, and have great testimonials from people about how this could actually happen in New York, it's something that could be helpful to people. A lot of people keep them off the street. So that's a wonderful step in making this happen.
Thank you. Yes, I'm, as you can probably tell, an advocate of the natural light side of things, but I also, picking up on the comments that were made, I think it's very important that you recognize that you put the light where it's needed. So, sometimes we come up against projects where we can't fill the entire room with natural light, and you just have to accept the fact you can't. But if you can put it in the places that matter to the people using the room, that's what really counts. And that's what it needs. So you need to have a nice, simple, straightforward analysis that we use, code, one that's measurable and enforceable and repeatable, and then a pragmatic approach.
Good morning, I think. It's wonderful to be here, Jessica, with you and CHPC. And for myself, I've been working with CHPC and Chaya on this for more than a decade now, almost 15 years since Frank Bracconi published that first kind of CHPC studies identifying that there were likely at least 100,000 illegal, non-compliant underground units in the city. And I will say that on, what is today, Tuesday night, we put Intro 1004 on the desks of the council members to age. That's what we do with legislation. People, I guess, age too. Which does not guarantee it will be voted out at the city council stated meeting next Wednesday, but there's a very good likelihood that it will. So it's pretty exciting that after 10 plus years of work together, we're on the cusp of passing that, and the city has put together a good subsidy program for low-income homeowners to make it possible for them. And so we're going to test something really exciting. And of course, Matt kind of alluded to this too, the ways in which we are in some ways reproducing the debate of not just a decade, but a century of housing policy, trying to think about how we are balancing affordability, quality, access, and the existing built stock that we have. I'm just pretty mindful of, and I feel very torn. I feel like this is funny. It's like a game show because I'm so inspired by what we saw up here, and I do think there's an enormous amount we can learn from it as we go about this pilot. And I feel like it's sort of our responsibility to bring it crashing down into the reality of politics and policy making. You guys are living in the reality of thinking about, the human spirit and how it relates to our biology and what you could do with great design. And we live in the world of politics. So xenophobia is a barrier to getting this policy done. And people's just a resistance to density. Maybe you guys could do I don't know if circadian rhythm is related somehow to why we don't want any more development and density. You could do some more studies on that. So the challenging political realities we've got, the challenging policy making realities we have of dealing with the different agencies. The fire department's job is to be super conservative about the safety of New Yorkers and firefighters. And so getting them to think differently about things is designed to be institutionally hard, and in practice works out to be institutionally even harder. And then policymaking is done in law, and what we tend to put, at least in our codes, are really challenging to be creative with. So how those things fit together, I think, is just like fascinating, and I'm thrilled. On the one hand, we're at this moment where the pilot is about to start, and I'm mindful that it doesn't go anywhere near to tapping into the level of creativity. And I think there's some opportunities there because we've got what I think is really a pretty clunky code for a pilot, but we could test a lot. Matt and I are just like over here just like talking and making notes because we could do a lot to test out some of these things and see how they work. And I think we could actually maybe find ways to work together. I don't know if we could get some money outside. Like the pilot, we were joking, like there's things in here that the subsidy money that the city has got in place can pay for, and there's things in here there's no way the subsidy can pay for. So how we think about what we could learn from this pilot, and at the end of it, maybe really push even further forward than this demonstration program. I think this today is a really, really useful for us. So 2 questions. One, in London, how did you get through you've got the same set of bureaucracies, you've got a buildings department and a fire department, and they must have been as change resistant to a lot of the things here as has happened in New York City. We've got some friends in the room from those places, so I'm thrilled we all got there together, but it was not easy. I'm curious how that went. And then second, I do want you to talk a little about affordability. Well, I guess and the affordability question has 2 parts. One, just what things cost, but 2, a big challenge in New York City is that an enormous number of these units are already occupied. They're occupied by quite low-income people. And so the opportunity, like so much of what I saw here is like if you were building new buildings or if you had spaces occupied by folks with lots of money who were going to make lots more money on them, you could do these things. But if you're in an environment where you've got lots of folks underground who are low income, who are already living in spaces, how do we balance the sort of aspirational qualities of what you can do with the reality of the build stock we've got and wanting to make it better and safer, but still within the context of having an affordability level that doesn't mean those people have to get thrown out and some new people that could pay a whole lot more come in and replace them in beautiful spaces.
I think to try and answer the question on how did it all come together, it's not just London, it's a UK-wide standard. So
we really do great with that here if we tried for that today. Yeah, excellent.
So I suspect there was as many politics and as much blood on the walls, there, but it was a national standard. So once these things are decided at a national standard, then they're adopted by each regional. They're managed regionally and locally, so within London and whatever. But it will have been adopted at a national standard. And I think the big driver, there was 2 drivers really, to be quite honest with you. Immediately after the Second World War, we'd lost a lot of housing in the UK, and we built an awful lot of housing that was absolute rubbish. And thankfully, something around 25 years ago, this realization dawned. And it's still a ticking time bomb for us, because a lot of those houses are now just falling apart because they're rubbish. So there was a concerted effort to do something about this. And we were lucky that we had the Building Research Establishment, which is a not-for-profit, huge campus north of London, and it covers everything. It covers everything from fire safety to insulation to everything. So you had a body that was out with the government that you could say, go and put together some models and some ideas and make sure they don't clash. Because that's often what happens, is one person's needs or one interested party's needs clashes with another. So that's how it came to be. We were fortunate that we started Limitless 12 years ago and it had already been decided, so I didn't have to worry too much about it. On the subject of affordability, the price that was shown there for one of our systems was high, but that's because I wasn't really fully engaged and didn't really know what we were doing. So the figures I gave Jen were probably on the basis of somebody coming from the UK and installing it, which is never going to be, cost effective. It would be cost prohibitive, and that's the kind of figure that you saw there. And I think that was for 2 anyway, but whatever. But I did give you the example there of the local authority where a building was brought back into use and they gave a grant for £25,000. Well, the condition of that was that it had to go to a low-income family to get the grant. Yeah. And we did another job for a client up in town up in the north, And she just complained to her local authority that she was retired, she was living in this place, and she didn't have enough natural light. And so they paid us to go and stick one in for her. As far as they're concerned, that's increased. She stays put, they don't have to rehouse her, and it's increased the value of their stock. So you can I don't know the model here, obviously, so you can approach the affordability thing from a number of different angles.
Before I send it over to Tony, I just have one more question on that. So one is, right now, if I'm a building inspector, I walk into a basement, I have my tape measure, I measure the window. If it's 12 feet, we're okay. If it's not 12 feet, we're not okay. So how do you, if I'm a building inspector in London, how do I know if the space meets the code? And then second to that, how do you also address changes in the built environment? If someone builds a building next door to me, then how does that change the code, and how is that addressed in the code and in the apartment?
Okay, so the way the system works is that the building is approved, and at the planning stage, so this is before somebody goes into the thing. So if you were talking about a cellar, in London we call a cellar is a place for storage, it's not for habitation or use. A basement is for habitation or use. So you'd be applying to change it from a cellar to a basement. When you put that planning application in to make that change of use, what's going to come back is there enough light, is there enough fresh air, is there enough, etc. And you'd have to prove it. So by the time the building inspector comes along, all he's doing is checking that what's been promised has been delivered, because it will have been in the plan, basically. So that's how that's resolved. Yeah.
And that's
And then if you then take the second question, we provide something called daylight assessment reports for basements and for places which don't have much natural light, using the software that the BRE wrote for us. So what happens, your second part of your question is, somebody comes along to build something, the next door neighbor thinks, hello, I'm going to lose my light. So they then demand that a report is produced that proves that they're not going to lose their light, or if they are going to lose their light, that the development can't go ahead. So then we get a phone call, we have to produce a report, which can come down either side, obviously, because it has to be correct.
And hopefully that's the next level for us in New York City, to get beyond basements to cellars, because I think there are a lot of cellars. At a personal level, this topic was great for me, because we lived. I told my wife about this, and she says, "Oh yeah, well, we lived in three basement apartments." And so we had firsthand experience of it. Professionally, I'm an architect, of course, and we're dealing with this all the time. We have one new building going up where we have a cellar apartment that, to make it legal, we have to excavate 30 feet in front of. The thing that disappoints me is that now we have to add that cellar apartment, legal apartment, as floor area, and so Brad asked him to take that into consideration. Maybe they could not count that as floor area, because you're going down, you're not really increasing the bulk. I absolutely love the space analogy in the circadian cycle description. That was, I learned something there, because at the end of the day, it's all about health. At the same time, I'm terrified, because I as being on the other end and the practicing end, I don't want yet another set of regulations, loopholes, not loopholes, but hurdles to jump over. But I think it's needed, and I think it's absolutely necessary. The reason that a lot of the laws were put in place, obviously, was for a good reason, to improve the quality of life of folks. And I think that the code needs to catch up to the ability of our technology to have a cellar space or basement space that has a proper quality of life. So I think it's absolutely critical that whatever laws are put into place are stated, even though the multiple laws are very clunky. For us as architects, it's defined, it's clear, the 12 square feet, the 5% of light, 10% of light, 5% of ventilation. All those rules are very easy. So to get beyond them, whatever we do next should be very systematic and standardized. One thing that has happened, though, where I could see this going, is that just as with energy, at the building department now, they have a special unit to study each building's energy usage in a very sophisticated way. So it is possible that the same level of scrutiny could be provided to converting basements and making sure that there's adequate, that there are folks that can actually, particularly if we go with with electrical light solutions. So the question I have, mostly for the powered lighting, the light fixture folks, is any comment that you might have on Graham's and the UK practice of the insistence on natural light. The one question that comes to mind is, is it best to leave the lights on their own rhythm so that they come on almost mimicking the sun, or is it a switch on, switch off according to the tenant? That's one thing. The sense of what's going on outside, I feel it in me. I mean, I do want to know, and I don't know that artificial light would do that. So that's the question to any of you.
Yeah, when we had our first phone call with Kate at the Housing Council, the first thing she said was, well, we want to talk about natural light and artificial light. And those are words that we never, ever use. There's really no such thing. Light is light. So there are two things that you get from a window. One is, as Star eloquently pointed out, is that connection to the outdoors. And we call that the biophilia hypothesis, and meaning that people have this natural desire to be connected to the outside. They want to see it. If they can't see it, they at least want to see what, if it's a skylight, even if it's frosted, at least you get a sense of that connection. You know what's happening outside. And when a researcher at our institution did a retrospective of all research done in daylight, and it's really two things. The only thing that makes daylight special is it's a great spectrum. You tend to get more of it than you can with electric light, and you have that connection to the outdoors. And there's nothing except some kind of an aperture that can give you that connection. You can mimic it with electric light, and there have been some research that showed that people preferred windowed offices to non-windowed offices. That makes sense, right? But if you gave them a picture of a window, they liked their non-windowed office a little bit better. So that idea that you can simulate it, there does seem to be some research there that shows that through a skylight or through another system, you can simulate that to the point where that's better than just a static light. The idea of light having to come on and at a particular rate slowly, and there doesn't seem to be any research that, at least from a health point of view, that makes any difference. You can switch the light on in the morning, you get that amount of light. It doesn't make any difference if it comes up slowly or fades slowly in the evening. What you really want is you want a bright, rich source of light in the morning. You want a dimmer source of light in the evening, so that it gets your body kind of ready to go to sleep. If you give a bright source of light at night, it does the exact opposite thing that you want it to do. It'll actually make you go to bed later. So long answer to that, and I'll let obviously other people talk as well.
I'm going to jump in because what I'll say is I completely disagree with the idea of eliminating the need for a window. But we all know not all windows are created the same. So the opportunity with electric light to support and provide additional light exposure in a way that's very regulated and scientific and designed is tremendous. It will never replace the window in that, because that window is never going to lose power or have a mechanical issue that's going to make so that it doesn't turn on. The window's always going to turn on because the sun's always going to rise. So that's my 2 cents. And then the expert.
Well, there's so much to talk about. So I guess to the question, I feel like I still need to ask the affordability question. I think with electric lighting, we absolutely could do anything according to, and really to the other question of what's going outside. We could really do anything as relating to, if it's a bright sunny day, we can make it, create that color separation. If it's a cloudy day, we could make it all kind of, gray. I don't know why I'd want that, but you could do it. If you ask for it, we absolutely could do it, and we could do it cost effectively. I think if you couldn't gather from my presentation, I'm pretty passionate about this stuff, and I think that all this stuff is vital to our health. And so to make it elusive is silly. It has to be affordable. It has to be integratable with common technologies so that it is retrofittable and done in a very easy way. From a how it works in a natural setting, it could be done to where that it rises when the sun rises. What we've done, and I could show the demo if anyone wants to see it, is we could create that dusk where it has that purple and amber hues that come up, which are not just psychologically magical, but biologically is being significant as well, to really elicit that really cool phenomenon that honestly we don't have enough opportunities in our society to experience a sunrise and a sunset, and to be able to bring that in. I don't know that many windows actually do that in a very effective way. So just like anything, you could turn on a light switch and it has a program behind it, and it just knows based on this time. You could either set it up to wake you up when the sun rises or not. But it could really be very easy and foolproof, and that's really kind of the gist of what we want to do. And of course, cost effective, because why wouldn't we do that? Are there any more questions?
Just Graham, I know we're short on time here. Graham, quick question though: is there anything in the UK about a total artificial light, or is it still pretty much natural?
No, the driver is natural light where it's possible and feasible. Definitely, without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, at the moment, we're undergoing a massive project called Crossrail, which is the biggest construction project in Europe at the moment, where they're driving a railway line all the way under London. Should have been done years ago, anyway. And there was a lot of discussion about the people who have to work on Crossrail and natural light. So unlike the London Underground, where those people's places of work are actually down by the tracks, all their places of work are at the top. So the only people who go down by the tracks are the people who drive the trains and the people who sit on the trains, the passengers. Because there's no feasibility. You can't get down there. It has to be artificial. You just can't get it down there. So no, that the fundamental premise is wherever possible, natural light.
I just want to make a couple of observations that I think will be useful to us going forward. One, just so people in the audience know, we are in the new law allowing the legalization of cellar units. There has to be at least 2 feet above grade, and then a range of the other codes and issues related to light. But it's not the case that our program is only for basements. It will allow cellars with at least 2 feet above grade. It's a little unclear. Was that grade in the front, grade in the back? But we'll, talk to the buildings department. Second, one real challenge here is about the spaces that already exist and how we're thinking about them differently from spaces that don't yet exist. The place we have this the most challenging in the negotiation of the bill was actually around ceiling heights, where our code is 8 feet, we're going down to 7.5, and the bill draft says we can actually go down to 7 with HPD and fire department sign off. That's obviously very different if you're thinking about a unit that does already exist or doesn't already exist. If it doesn't exist, there's a really good argument not to create a unit that the fire department says will be hard to keep people safe in. Not a very good argument to not allow the regularization and making safer of a unit somebody's already living in and where there might be a fire. And so why would we say, no, we're going to reject that unit? We can't do that in the law because we can't legally recognize and give standing to something that was done illegally. But that's a real challenge we have. And I think it relates to some of these naturally and artificial light issues, because in units that already exist, that there's no way we're going to add light wells to, in some cases, even if there might be creative solutions at some cost. Do we want to encourage people in those units, if they meet minimum code requirements, to test out some of the artificial light and see how much better that is? And that brings me to the third point, which is and this is really in some ways just a pitch to CHPC and HPD for us to think about how to work together going forward. Like, I've been thinking of it as, we're going to get here, we're going to have the pilot. Normally what our pilots do is produce kind of government reports, like, did it work okay? And I think the opportunity is to think a lot more creatively, like taking the set of units that HPD is going to put subsidy into in East New York, and thinking about whether we might be able to pilot some of the kinds of technologies and then do some surveying and testing to figure out what that meant. Could make this a lot more compelling as a pilot than what it will be if we just go with the law and the program we've already designed. So we don't have that planned yet. It's not designed into our program, but it's not designed out either. I think there's some really exciting opportunities to move forward with this. So thank you.
So thank you so much, everybody. I think one of the things with lighting that we're going to have to work on with this basements pilot is focusing on not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, because like we've all said, there's people living in these basements already, and then just to get back to my roots, there's also 60,000 homeless people in the city, and 3,000 of whom are living on the streets. So they have wonderful relationship to the outside world, but without a roof over their head. So we want to try to make sure to create a code that's easily implementable. That's incredibly important. As a lifelong government bureaucrat, I believe very strongly in the capacity to do that, but that we have to catch up to where the technology has been as well. So thank you all so much to our panelists and our responders. We're going to take a 10-minute break, go get some coffee, a cookie, some natural light, come back here in 10 minutes, and we're going to do a panel about fire safety.